are the Research Council board members. Would you all please stand if you're here, please, board members? These are the volunteers that make this happen. A quick recognition, we have some MRED students here today. Asia, Nick, and Matt up here. Say hi. So, famous investor, one of the most successful investors most everybody will know, Warren Buffett. Famous quote he's always talks about is, buy in fear, sell in greed. And thinking of the retail market, there seems to be some fear out there about retail, but that also could create some opportunities and allow people to make money, buy in greed, or buy in fear. So with that, I'm going to introduce our presenter, Sarah Baker, who, Sarah, if you want to come on up. Sarah did the industrial report for this group 2 years ago. It was a fantastic report. I've read her retail report. It is, hopefully you will find it is equally tremendous. She earned a master's degree from UCLA. She has community involvement in various organizations, some of which include past president of the Appraisal Institute, and currently she is the interim board chair for this organization. And she has earned her esteemed designation in the appraisal world, the MAI designation, which is a very significant milestone. She is a partner in Baker Peterson Baker appraisal firm here that was founded in 1974. Please welcome Sarah Baker.
Thanks, everybody. I'm glad to be here. So I was asked to do a report on the retail market. As you can imagine, that's a really big topic and very hard to cover. And so the report itself covers a lot of different topics looking at supply and demand factors. Those of you who are members, you will soon see that full report, and it is over 75 pages. So it's a little bit hard to condense all of that down into a short presentation. So please know that there is a lot that I'm just not able to cover. So please, I hope you take the time to look at the report, and you'll be able to find a lot more detail in there. I would like to thank everybody who, Tom and I worked on this together, who were interviewed by us. We really appreciate all of your help. So getting into the presentation, first of all, how much retail space do we have? As you can see, we have almost 5,400 square foot, we have almost 5,400 retail buildings and almost 54 million square feet of retail buildings. So you can see that we have been having new construction. It's not like since the recession that building has stopped. We are still seeing new construction. We expect this to continue. So how are we looking in different submarkets? Overall, we have a vacancy rate of 5.4% for Tucson, but that's not the same all over. As you can imagine, there are some submarkets that have a lot more demand than others. Some submarkets that have higher vacancy rate include Central East, East, Southeast, and Southwest. There's also some that are doing well and that have low vacancy rates. Looking at this, you can see the Southwest sector, downtown, foothills, and the West sector. Taking a look at rental asking rates, you can see that the average asking rental rate's $14.69 for all of Tucson, but again, there's a lot of variety in there. If you take a look, the Southwest has the lowest asking rental rates, and then the Central West. But the North Oro Valley sector and the Foothills sector have a lot higher. They're over $21 a square foot on average. Overall, we're doing pretty well in terms of net absorption for the year, 732,000 square feet positive net absorption. Most of the submarkets are seeing, positive, good trend of positive net absorption, except for, as you can see, the East is having year-to-date negative net absorption. The Southwest, a little bit, although it's not significant. So how do we compare overall to some other markets? Again, This is from CoStar, just taking a look at some other Southwest cities. So you can see that overall, our vacancy rate is lower than a lot of the other competitive cities, except for El Paso, which is all the way down at 4.5%. Phoenix is up there at 7%. But we have lower average asking rental rates than a lot of these other cities. Even though our vacancy rate is lower, they're able to get more in rent. So in the report, I go through in more detail several of the submarkets. Obviously, we don't have time to do that this morning, but I did briefly want to touch on two of them. One is the downtown retail market. Overall, the restaurant and bar market in the downtown area is very strong. Rents remain high. There's a lot of new restaurant concepts that have entered the downtown market, and there's talks with other ones. We may see some national chains coming in downtown. There are some concerns about reaching a saturation point. There's only so many restaurants that you can have in the downtown market. The question is, are we there yet? Are we close? Or is there still room to grow? But the big problem downtown is the lack of demand for general retail. So the question is, why are general retailers, particularly the national chains, not entering the downtown market? There have been several national retail chains who have come and looked at the downtown market but haven't yet leased. So there's kind of two reasons that people in the market talk to us about as to why the general retailers are not entering this market. The first is the lack of a proven success story. It's a big risk to be the first. If there is no proven track record and you come in, you want to be the first, but you're a little bit hesitant, you're nervous, you don't know if you're going to be successful. If there's somebody who's already come before you who has shown, yes, the downtown is a good general retail market, then you'll start to see others. So the question is, who's going to be the first? Who's going to take that risk? I mean, you can see this in the hotel market downtown. There was hesitation, we needed a new hotel downtown. Finally, somebody said, okay, we will be the first, and now that they've proven to be successful, you've had several other hotels downtown that have been announced. The other issue that people talk about is needing more market rent residential units downtown so that there's more 24/7 activity. We have had growth in residential units in the downtown area, so that's helped together with the restaurants and bars to extend the life and activity in the downtown area beyond just the workday. But still, retailers would like to see more. There have been a lot of residential units downtown that have been announced. So the hope is that once some of those are built, you come in, you have some high-density residential units down there, you have lots of activity going, lots of people walking around in foot traffic, that can also help to bring in those retailers. So just to touch on one other submarket, looking at the east and central submarkets, the demand continues to be weaker in these markets. The vacancy rate's higher. And as we talked about in the east, there's been net negative absorption this year. The issue is there's lots of older buildings that were constructed decades ago when the housing was constructed. So the housing is aging and the retail buildings are aging. There's not a whole lot of land available for large new residential developments because that might be something that would spur on new retail demand. But this is an area that's outside of the path of growth that would spur this significant new development. So this is not expected to change anytime in the near future without some sort of large redevelopment. In the report, we go through and give some samples and discussions about sales, the type of properties that are selling, about sale prices, listings, cap rates, just to touch on a few highlights. There continues to be strong demand for leased properties by investors. particularly for national tenants, those big chains. The capitalization rates remain low for a lot of these national chains. Cap rates for big box stores or centers with a lot of big box stores, according to market participants, have increased slightly. There's some concerns by some in the market about big box stores because there have been some vacancies, some bankruptcies, people leaving these units, and these buildings that are large, they're hard to release sometimes because they're big. There's not that many people who need 25,000 square feet. And so once they become vacant, there are some new tenants who are coming into those, which we'll talk about later, but those could potentially sit on the market for a while. There's strong demand and low cap rates for restaurants, and there also continues to be purchases by owner users, by local businesses, which we really like to see as well. While prices can be high, low rental rates and prices can still be found for older properties in areas of less demand. You can still buy buildings for, older mid-block buildings for low sale prices. Lease rates, just like sale prices, can kind of be all over depending upon what kind of property you're talking about. You can still lease retail spaces for under $10 a square foot, triple net, but there's a lot available in the 10 to 20 per square foot range, and you can even be up at 25. But if you have a new building, especially with a specialty use, like medical or restaurant, and you're on a corner location, you can be all the way up to 30 to 40. So really big range out there depending upon what price range and what property you're looking at. So taking a look at historical construction, we have a large stock of older buildings. Most of our buildings were constructed before the 90s, mostly in the 70s and 80s. We have a lot of larger buildings. A lot of our buildings recently have been larger. And you can kind of tell because this chart, just to make sure you can read it, that orange bar represents the number of buildings constructed, and the blue line represents the square footage constructed. In the early years, the buildings were smaller, which is why that blue line is further down compared to the orange bars. But lately, the buildings have been larger, which is why you see that blue line up ahead. And as you can see, there's been very little construction since 2010. So we were asked to take a look at spec construction and kind of what rent people would need to get in order to make it financially feasible to do a spec building. And we looked at both junior boxes and a strip building, so we'll get to that one in a minute. When we talked to market participants, they said they generally wanted an 8 to 10% rate of return. So taking a look at a 25,000 square foot junior box, we said that the total cost for everything, including land, building, soft costs, would be $4,125,000. We're talking about an average building here. That can go a lot higher if your land cost is higher, if you have more build out. So looking at an 8% rate of return, you need to get about $1,450 in rent, and a 10% of rate of return, you'd need to get $1,650. Well, for this kind of average building, $1,650 is pretty high. It is possible potentially to get $1,450. But when we talked to market participants, they told us that while you can generally still get an 8% rate of return, that 10% rate of return is a lot harder to get right now. And so that kind of goes with what we see here. They would like to get a 10% rate of return. That's what they would prefer. But that's just getting a lot harder to do out there in the market. They also said, though, even if it pencils out, they're more hesitant to do spec construction for these boxes because of what I talked about, because they're concerned that these users are not moving into the market the way that they were. So they're a little bit more hesitant to spec out these buildings. So taking a look at a 6,000 square foot strip retail building, we kind of looked at a cost of $300 per square foot. But these can get a lot more expensive. If they have more build out, if they're on a corner location, so the land cost is a lot higher. But again, looking at an 8% rate of return, you're looking at a feasibility rent of $24, but a 10% rate of return is $30. While you can see new buildings leasing, new spaces leasing for $24, $30 is pretty high for an average type of retail space without, specialty building. So that would tell us that once again, with what market participants said, that 10% rate of return is getting a lot harder to achieve. So one of the things that we're seeing in the market right now, a lot of, is redevelopment. And there's kind of two aspects to redevelopment that we talk about in the report. The first one is demolition of an old building so that you can build something new. This is mostly happening in the central part of town, areas where there's not a lot of vacant land that's there ready for development. We've seen a lot of different types of buildings and even some investment properties that have been purchased for demolition, but a lot of them have gone for restaurant uses, different fast food chains, Starbucks, even Dutch Brothers went in an old Mimi Cafe over by Park Place. Even so on some larger spaces, we've seen some Walmarts developed. Lighted corners are a popular place for this to happen. Valencia and Midvale, there was an old C-store that was demolished, and they put on 2 fast food restaurants, Fort Lowell and Swan. I know that one very well. It's very convenient to my office, so I'm very happy about that one. They took down 2 buildings and constructed a Starbucks, and then Glenn and Campbell also, they took down some buildings for a Starbucks there. There's also been a lot of redevelopment on Broadway over near Park Place around the Wilmot-Craycroft corridor. Several years ago, there was redevelopment of 2 corners at Broadway and Wilmot, where we saw a lot of new construction at the northeast and southeast corners. But there's also been, on the north side of Broadway, several new restaurants that have been developed, and those were all former, religious facility use or old retail use that were demolished and then redeveloped. There's also sites out there that have buildings that are advertised as being available for redevelopment. And so there's a couple that are planned for redevelopment soon, like Broadway and Rosemont and the southeast corner of Grant and Tucson. Sometimes in redevelopment, buildings aren't torn down, they're just repurposed and they become a new use. These former retail buildings become some different type of use. And so you can see a few of the general types of properties. This is just a few examples where that's happened. So in the report, we talk in detail about several specific property types. I wanted to just talk briefly about one of those, which is supermarkets. So this marks supermarkets that have been recently closed, some that have been opened, and a couple that are planned. Kind of the red are the closed, the yellow are the planned, and the green are the ones that are open. Not looking at like Walmart neighborhood markets where there's food that's sold. This is just some of the major grocery chains. So when it comes to closed grocery stores, in the past, once a grocery store closed, that was a big problem because there's not that many people who need that much space, and because of the shape and how deep they are, they're really hard to divide up into multi-tenant buildings. So there have been a couple that have sat vacant for a long time. But as you can see, there are several that have converted to other uses or are planned. And I'm sure you can see fitness is a big use. Fitness has really grown, and that is a great user for a former grocery store. It's a large open space, which those big fitness chains want, and they have a lot of parking available. So market participants told us that generally for a second generation space, they can expect around $11 to $14. There have been some new grocery stores developed as well. In Valencia, west of I-19, down in Sarita and in Vail, kind of areas of development where there was some pent-up demand for grocery use. And then there's a couple that are planned as well. So let's talk a little bit about changes in retail. There's been a lot of not so great changes, as we've seen. A lot of retailers declaring bankruptcies, a lot of retailers closing stores, kind of to pull back, try and cut costs. Retailers have also been experimenting with smaller buildings or smaller spaces. They're trying to see if they can get, what's the minimum size that they need. They're trying different floor plans. One of the things that I actually just saw an article about within the last couple of weeks was IKEA. They are cutting jobs, and they're also trying a smaller store format in some urban markets. They're not the only retailer doing this. Retailers are also expanding at a slower rate. And it might have been in the past that a specific retailer would open 500 new stores in a year, but now they're only opening 50. So that means that there's a lot more competition for new stores. If you want to get a new store from a specific national retailer, what they're doing is they're looking at different locations, not just different locations in Tucson, but comparing us to competitive cities and saying, which of these locations is going to give us the most profit? So in order to get that retailer, you need to show that's us. That's, this site will give you the most profit, or else you're not going to get that site. So because of that cutback in growth by a lot of these retailers, it's becoming a lot more competitive out there. So all of this has led to an increase in vacant space. But as we saw, our vacancy rate is declining, and it's down to 5.4%. So the question is, who's filling our retail space? And it's non-traditional users who are going into retail centers. When we talk to market participants, they tell us they want Amazon-proof tenants. Because if you have tenants right now in your centers who are just selling goods, that can go online. But if you have non-traditional users, if you have schools, if you have medical uses, some other service type of use, that can't go online. So that is a good investment for owners, people who are filling their centers. And those people are coming into our retail centers. So what uses are we seeing that are doing really well in the market right now? Restaurants. We've seen a lot of growth in restaurants. The demand is strong. There's been growth whether you're looking at fast food restaurants or whether you're looking at sit-down restaurants. But the fast casuals are growing at the fastest rate. We've seen a lot of chains come into Tucson recently, or those that are already here are expanding. There's a lot of demand from investors for these restaurant users. This chart is from the USDA, and it shows that starting in around 2010, people are actually spending more money buying food away from their home than they are on food that they're preparing at home. So people are eating out more than ever. And so that is not expected to change. So the restaurant market's predicted to continue to be strong. As long as people are eating out more than they're eating at home, the restaurant market's going to remain strong. So what else besides restaurants is doing well? Fitness. We talked about fitness. There's been some new construction as well as leasing of existing buildings, like former grocery stores. We're seeing the large chains come in and expand, but we're also seeing smaller spaces occupied by specialty fitness users as well. Entertainment. A few years ago, we got a Dave & Buster's. In Park Place, there was a recent lease where we're going to see what they called an eatertainment, where you can eat and play games as well. Lots of different entertainment type uses. Pet services. We're seeing a lot of those. Some chains like Pet Club, but also smaller places where you can do doggy daycare. And up in Phoenix, they now have indoor dog parks. And there's a lot of stuff. We pamper our pets. So there's a lot of retail businesses who look for that. Health and wellness users. These users are really, really moving into retail centers. You can now find not only urgent cares in retail centers, but you can find family doctors in there as well, and just general service users as well. So some retail centers that in the past might have been entirely general, the typical traditional retail, you're now seeing non-traditional users. Looking at Bear Canyon and Tinka Verde, that center is almost entirely non-traditional or service users. You have a Goodwill, but you have a Block, which is a rock climbing gym. There's also a school, a general fitness, a CrossFit, and karate. Lots of fitness in there. Restaurant, physical therapy, a lot of those type of users. There was recently a building, a 3-tenant strip building built on Tinka Verde. In the past, that's got great exposure. In the past, it might have been all traditional retailers, but now you're looking at, you have Sprint in there, but you have Urgent Care as the main tenant and a Nationwide Vision. A 3-tenant building on Ina Road, it's on a lighted corner. It has Urgent Care, a Wingstop, and a Tidal Max. Again, these are all kind of Amazon-proof users. The northeast corner of Broadway and Wilmot was redeveloped, and that has a lot of traditional retailers in it. But there's a pad building that's right there at the corner, and so that has great exposure at a major lighted corner. In the past, you might have expected all traditional retail. That is now all health and wellness users. I mean, you not only have an Urgent Care, but you have dentist, physical therapy. So you're seeing a lot of those users. So overall, the retail vacancy rate is only as low as it is because of non-traditional users moving into traditional retail centers. And in fact, the very definition of retail real estate is really changing and broadening, because these buildings, even though they may have medical users, some of these non-school users, some of these non-traditional, they're still counted as retail buildings, and the market still really looks at them that way. So taking a look at what's holding us back. For starters, our retail buildings are aging, and we really are overbuilt for retail, not only in Tucson, but in America as general. In general, this chart looks at retail square feet per capita in the United States compared to other countries. And you can see we have 24 square feet per capita compared to 16 square feet in Canada, 5 feet in the UK, all the way down to 2 in Germany. We have way more retail space per capita than other countries. We really have overbuilt as a country, and now we have to adjust. At some point, there comes a time when you say we have too much retail space and the market is correcting itself. And not only in Tucson, but all over, you're seeing that a lot of this retail space is older retail space that's aging and starting to show its age. So other factors, population growth has been slow. This chart shows the Tucson's population growth, and you can see it was rising pretty steadily up until the recession hit, and then it kind of flattened. It's increased since that time, but the rate of growth is a lot lower. Population growth is something that would really trigger demand for retail development. So we really would like to see that rate of population growth increase in order to see demand for new retail construction. Something that would help us to grow our population would be strong job growth. Our job growth remains slow. This chart shows our job growth in Tucson, where the green line, compared to Phoenix, Arizona, and the United States. So during the recession, our job growth slowed less than Arizona in general in the Phoenix market, but quickly they've recovered faster than us, and their job growth remains higher. There have been efforts to bring in jobs, especially higher paying jobs. We need to continue with that. New residential development would also help increase demand for retail development. There's the saying, retail follows rooftops. Where there is significant new residential development, that's where you're going to see new retail construction. So this shows, though, that as we all know, the number of building permits has remained sluggish. And so until we can see some significant new residential growth, that's not going to be something that helps trigger retail demand. Another thing that we took a look at is taxable sales. And this shows general retail taxable sales in Arizona, Pima County, and City of Tucson. Arizona is obviously the blue line, up much higher. So it's expected to be higher in Arizona because the Arizona number covers Phoenix and is largely influenced by Phoenix. But what's important to note from this is the rate of growth. The rate of growth in taxable sales is much higher in Phoenix than it is in Pima County and Tucson. In fact, it's higher in Pima County than it is in Tucson. There just has been not a whole lot happening in Tucson. The rate of growth is very slow in terms of these taxable sales. Not a whole lot of retail activity happening. Took a look at the same information in terms of restaurants and bars. The rate of growth in all three areas is higher than for general retail, but still you can see that lowest line, the Tucson, it's barely budging, whereas in Arizona, based upon the much stronger retail growth in Phoenix, theirs is increasing at a much faster rate. Let's talk about online for a minute. Sometimes when you ask people how much of the total retail sales do you think happens online, and they'll say 40% or something like that. But in reality, out of total retail sales, less than 10% is happening online. And by 2021, that's expected to be only not even quite 14%. So while online retailing is something that is important, it is not taken over all of retail sales yet. In fact, online retailers want physical stores to remain strong. They need them. They need them to act as showrooms. One study that we saw said that if an online retailer opens a physical store, that their website traffic increases by an average of 37%. So they benefit from opening physical stores, which is why you're seeing now some online retailers start to open these stores. I mean, now you can go and see an Amazon store, and they want that option because they see that having both online and physical stores tends to be the best for most of these companies. Some products are just always going to work better in a store. People want to be able to touch things, try them out, try them on, and some people they have to go try on their clothes. But some products are a lot easier and to buy online. Repeat goods, things like books, that number for books is a lot higher than 10%. So you'll see some products where they're just going to continue to be sold more online, and some will continue to need stores. Online retailers are experimenting with different delivery options. Now they're trying out kiosks, sometimes even self-service, where you can just go to a kiosk and pick up your goods. We're doing click and collect, where you order online, you go to the store and pick it up. They might bring it to your car. What they really like now is when you have to go into the store and pick it up, because they've done studies that have shown that you are much more likely to pick up something additional while you're there. You order online, but as you're paying, you say, wait a minute, look what's here by the register, and you buy something else. Overall, online retailers, they're reacting to changing shopper preferences. The way that people shop, particularly the millennials, is changing. So depending upon what kind of customer base retailers are trying to reach, they have to pay attention to those changes. Even small local retailers now that in the past never paid attention to online, now it's really important that they have a good website if they're not selling their goods online. If you are hoping to hit your customer base as millennials, Hopefully you're there and online, not only online, but looking at social media. Overall for e-commerce, there's advantages and there's disadvantages, just like anything else. And so we're not going to see the end of online retailing. It's going to continue to grow. The question is, how can you use online, social media, all of that to make your business more successful? Just a few other things that we noted. Discount stores and luxury retailers are maintaining their customer bases pretty well for the most part. It's the mid-tier retailers where you're seeing a lot of competition. As we talked about, they're experimenting with smaller stores, and part of that has to do with this online trend. Now they're looking at trying to sell more online, but having a smaller space that they can use as kind of a showroom for certain goods. And they're looking at social media and technology, not just for selling, but also for efficiency. If you have a sit-down restaurant, can you use the technology to have your customers pay at the table rather than taking their credit cards away, because that will get them out faster? If you have a fast casual or fast food restaurant, can you use technology to help them order faster? Maybe you have kiosks where they can order, right there by themselves before they even get to the counter. A few other things that are happening in the market that are important. Providing an experience and not just a sale is key. If all you are doing is providing a sale of a good, people can go online and do that, and you're more likely to lose your customers. How can you, as a retailer, provide an experience? Something that will draw people in, whether it's a special type of customer service, whether it's some sort of membership club where people who sign up with you and are members get to come in and try clothes on early before they go out to the rest of the store. Whatever it is, what's the experience that will draw people in and keep them coming back to you? Mixed-use developments are becoming more common all over the country. You see different uses in high-density developments that are all going together, and this draws people in and creates an activity center. You're going to see a lot of retail development starting to occur in these mixed-use developments. If you look at the Foothills Mall, that's what's planned for the Foothills Mall. There's going to be a lot less retail, but there's going to be retail, there's going to be restaurants, there's going to be entertainment, and they're hoping for office and residential uses as well. So all of those together are creating a synergy. In terms of incentives offered by, because looking at the question of what can the government do to help retail development, incentives are helpful, but unfortunately we're limited by what we can offer by the state. It can be hard to compete with cities in states where they're a lot more permissive and allow a lot more incentives. So overall, these are, we've talked about these, but just in conclusion, these are a few of the things we need to be aware of in terms of the retail market. You hear about a retail apocalypse, but that's not what market participants here see. This is not an apocalypse. There are changes. There are some challenges, but there's also opportunities for growth. The way people shop changes, so the way that retailers provide services also need to change. Retailers need to be flexible and be able to adapt. So owners and developers need to also be flexible and willing to adapt overall, and that way we can continue to grow and be strong. So, thank you very much.
I'll be your Hank Lomanak for this morning, and nobody knows who that is. This is, okay. I'm Greg Furrier from Cushman Wakefield Picor, and I'm going to kind of direct. So we're going to have audience participation. That's kind of important to us. We encourage heckling. If somebody's lying, we would like you to point it out. You can interrupt and finish somebody's answer if you have a better one. So we'd like participation, and I suppose if we don't get it, we might call on you. And I know a lot of you guys out there. And anyway, so we've got Sarah Baker, George Larson, Toby Horvath, Debbie Heslop, and Rob Tomlinson here. So I think we can start, and we'll ask the audience if anybody's got any pressing questions that they would like answered, and you can direct them to the entire panel or somebody specifically if you'd like.
Yes, it looks like, based on these numbers, that we have close to 50 square feet per capita in the Tucson market. How are we dealing with that aging inventory? Because it looks like all of the development is going to the periphery of the marketplace.
Aging inventory question. Rob, you take that?
I am aging inventory. So I saw Sarah's stat there, and obviously it varies from what you have in front of you, because you're looking at about 52 feet per square foot here in Tucson. There's different measurement types when you look at retail space, and Sarah's metric is a little bit different than perhaps the CoStar metric would be. So what you find, if you compare the two different data sets, it's a little bit misleading. I talked to some folks at CoStar some time ago because I've been interested in this subject for a while. And on average throughout the U.S., the way CoStar measures the retail square footage is about 50 feet per capita in the U.S. With a variation depending upon levels of tourism. And so you can see that we're a few points above 50% because of our tourism base. But if you look at a place like Las Vegas, for instance, it might be more like 60 feet per capita. So it's just a difference in data sets. But I'm sure that the proportions are the same. And that's really the message I think that Sarah was making with the, 24 feet, 11 feet, 15 feet, and then less than 10 feet for European nations.
And if I could add, there's actually a chart in the report that I didn't have time to get to that compares us to some of these competitive cities. And like Rob said, some of these cities, like Vegas, they are higher than us. I think it is just a matter of different data sets. Because that chart was obviously not done by CoStar, the one I provided. It just shows that overall we have more than most of these other countries.
Averages are always misleading. When you see an average rent in Tucson of, I don't know, $9 or $10 in certain trade areas, we could be signing leases at 42. So averages are very misleading. In Tucson, we have sprawl. And if we're being compared to urban centers with density, that's where the numbers get skewed a little bit. With sprawl, you could have a store on the east side and a store on the west side, a store on the north, and you need that kind of coverage to cover our market. So it may come down to where we have lots of retail, but we also have subdivisions everywhere, and you have to service that population.
How much movement do you guys see in cap rates playing out for 2019?
It all depends on interest rates.
I saw an article in National Real Estate Investor. I don't know if you read that publication, and they were comparing the stock market volatility to investors' flight to real estate, saying that because of the uncertainties in the stock market, many investors are now looking to put more of their wealth into real estate, which is good for us. The difficulty could be that when you buy a stock, you can do that with a phone call. When you buy real estate, it's a longer time period. So I think there's going to be increased interest in investment properties. Interest rates are critical, but there's a lot of lack of product, and that can help us keep our cap rates low.
I think there's a phenomenon of investors that we've seen where you have somebody that's got a pile of money sitting at Merrill Lynch that's earning 3/8 of a point, and all of a sudden a 5 cap looks pretty good, especially if you're elderly and you're living on that money.
A lot of rooftops at Gladden Farms, a lot of growth out there. What's your prediction on a grocer?
Is there anybody in the audience that can answer that question?
I would love my retail panel to tell me where my retail is going to come from on the west side.
Susie Ong is over there. Why won't Fry's open up? They have the property. What's going on there?
The story I heard was that they didn't want to cannibalize their store there at Duck Mountain.
Yeah.
I mean, the rooftops are there, but the cost of development seems to be extraordinarily high because of the community facilities district taxation.
Yeah, Fry's is afraid of his own shadow as far as opening more stores. They're very, very selective, and it's got a lot to do with how they're evaluating the competition from the internet for food sales. I think it's too soon to know yet whether that's going to be a major factor or a channel. But I think that's holding back a lot of retailers. Walmart is gone from building, I think the number was in 130 super centers a year about 4 or 5 years ago, down to building 7 this year or last year, or this year or the coming year. That's how much everybody is pulling back to see what is the channel that's going to be most profitable for them.
So Fry's has 4 or so deals on hold right now in Tucson. I'm not sure if any other grocery does.
The story that I'm hearing on the online grocery shopping, at our Walmart, there is a pickup in the online grocery shopping, but it turns out to be the students from the university rather than from the people in the neighborhood. So millennials are definitely different, and they're having an impact.
Millennials are different. I have a question for Toby. Speaking of millennials.
I'm not one.
This is a topic we all talk about kind of daily, is how do you get the millennials into the stores? What advice would a young person have?
Panel up front right here.
They may be better to answer that, but I think it's really important for retailers to have a presence online and also physical. I think that's the way that retailers are going to remain successful and be able to excel and keep up with the online sales.
I'm curious what your thoughts are, esteemed panel, of when we will reach a saturation or oversaturation point on the fitness centers and the urgent cares, which we're seeing everywhere, kind of like the mattress stores a few years ago.
That's a great question. So I guess maybe let's break that into 2 questions. Debbie, do you want to talk about fitness?
I think we're going to be the most buff town in all of Arizona. We have fitness going up everywhere. And if I were a property owner, I might think, okay, is my fitness user going to make it? Or am I going to get this space back in a couple of years when they decided the competition is too tough? Granted, it is a box, 4 walls and a roof, but it's got all the plumbing, it's got all the, the infrastructure for a gymnasium. So who takes that out of my building? Who's spending that money to demolish and create the shell again? So if I were an owner, I'd be thinking about that. Fitness is hot right now, but you know what? We've gone through these wars before. We went through the C-store war, the hamburger war, the pizza war. Now we're doing fitness. We did the mattress war, and now we're getting mattress firm spaces back to lease. The easy thing about mattress firms is they're nice vanilla shell spaces. They're flexible to release to someone else. Fitness is hot right now. I hope it sustains. I really do. There's a health and wellness feeling through our culture, which is great. Excuse me, but I questioning the longevity of that category.
Thanks, Debbie. I think that certainly rings true, and I think fitness to some degree is dependent on discretionary income, and when employment is high and incomes are strong, the fitness centers will do better. And when those things change, I think people will, work out the old-fashioned way by picking up rocks in their backyard. The next part of that question was urgent cares. Anybody want to talk about the urgent care business?
Yeah, we're trying to specialize. We've got doggy day spas now going. We have a doggy dermatologist in some of our centers. So we're going to take health and wellness with the dogs as our specialty. But there certainly are plenty of the other version, the urgent care centers. There's 2 or 3 emergency rooms that have sprung up that have a different level of care, meaning a doctor is there 24 hours a day. Do we oversaturate, or are we all getting older? That's the question.
Well, there's a lot of other medical users that are looking for traditional retail space too, dentists, orthodontists, even family practitioners, and so I think, you know, those are all viable uses for retail centers, and probably with urgent cares, I don't know, I think we're probably getting close to that point.
You know, Greg, I was going to say something. We were talking about mixed use, and the Foothills Mall being redeveloped as a fixed use is a very great example. But really, Sarah, if you look at retail and look at all the stores in that East Side Central area, they are being, it's almost like there's mixed uses in almost every shopping center. We had Cactus Moon, where Rob Tomlinson did some of his best work, is now going to be an accounting office. We have dentists going into Crossroads and Plaza at Williams Center. So it's almost like retail is becoming its own mixed use. It doesn't have to be start from scratch with 100 acres. It can be that other uses move into retail to fill that void where traditional retailers have left. What do you think of that idea?
I think that that's absolutely true. You can look at what's happening with retail centers in that way. And what we've also seen is people talking about wanting to densify and be able to get additional rooftops by maybe adding multifamily or something where there's more people there to be able to use those uses.
I like the Cactus Moon to the accounting office. They're two extremes, right? I mean, the biggest liars in the world and the people that tell the truth the most in the world in that same space. That's great. So I have a question for George. And this just came up yesterday. So I'm at the dispensary in line. And I looked in front of me, and there's this guy wearing this avocado green pair of pants and like a Harvest Gold check shirt and a fedora. And I look at him, and this guy looks familiar. It's George. And I said, what kind of pants are those, George? They're damn nice. They're tough skins. I said, oh, that's great. Nobody knows what tough skins are here, do they? Some of you guys are wearing them. Anyway, so one of the things that I've been curious about, and this is a legitimate question, is Sears. So the company is founded in the 1800s as a catalog business. It opens its first store. In fact, what was interesting is George was at the grand opening. So they opened their first store in 1922. He's a teenager, so it's... Anyway, so my question really is, what the hell happened to Sears? They had a 50-year head start on Walmart and Kmart, and so there's no reason that that company shouldn't be strong. And they got a couple strong brands, I think everybody knows, but what happened to them?
Well, first, one of the advantages of being old is I can remember when you were young. If I recall, it was in Palm Springs at ICSC, right, Nancy? Bar fights.
Oh, no.
There was a lot of mischief going on. We were coming back in Palm Springs from a night of drinking, and a cop pulls Greg over. He's driving. Cop comes to the window and looks at him and says, "You drinking?" Greg looks at him and says, "You buying?" We laughed and laughed.
Bad start to the night.
At any rate, there's some interesting stories about Sears. If you'll indulge me for a second, remember my partner Don Baker was part of the family that started Payless Shoes. And he related this story. Their headquarters was in Topeka, Kansas. And one day, a plane comes in, a twin-engine plane comes in, and Sam Walton is on that plane. And he wants to meet with the people who own Payless Shoes, the Pozas family. And they meet at the kitchen table, and Walton is in their kitchen table and says, "I need to buy your company Payless Shoes." And Shaw Pozas says, well, why? Why would you want to buy our company? You're growing pretty well as Walmart. He says, I need your inventory control system. Payless Cashway said concentrated on inventory control and cost control. And Walmart wanted to learn as much as they could about that. I believe the difference between Sears and Walmart was Walmart had this progressive, strictly cash flow, very careful custodians of their dollar, and that's why they succeeded and Sears didn't. There's a second element, of course, and that is Sears got bought by a financial engineer, the company, the hedge fund company, and I think they did a lot of financing. And a lot of these companies, Toys R Us is one, got in trouble not because their basic business was totally flawed, but because the people who owned them took money out of the company in the form of dividends, put high debt loads on them, and caused them to crash when there was the first blip.
Okay.
When I got in business, Sears was the #1 retailer in the country. Kmart was #2, and Montgomery Ward's was #4. That's how much we've changed.
Wow. Things have changed. Thanks for that explanation, George. Sears is kind of an interesting story because they did have their appliance and tools were great, and it seemed like they kind of fell on their face with most everything else. So, what other questions do we have?
Sure. So what are you putting up across the street?
What are we going to put up across the street? You know how Orange Theory is across the street and getting about $40 a square foot rents? We're going to try to emulate that with, of course, different restaurants, but it will be restaurant-centric center of about 15,000 square feet. Thanks.
I'd be interested to know what your experience has been with getting the traditional retailers that are at the center to sign off on those non-traditional co-tenancy uses. The best word I've heard for it or acronym has been WAR, waivers and restrictions. And I just want to get a sense of if that's getting better, if traditional retailers are understanding that this is the tenant mix of the future, or if it's still a battle.
I'm not on the panel, but I'm going to answer anyway. Because I actually was involved with the Grant Alvernon Vasa Fitness deal. And really the conclusion was you could wait and try to do a soft goods deal and split the box and spend a bunch of money doing it, or you could take what you could get quickly and try to keep the shop space tenants in business. And I think if you talk to the fitness people, they have their own story, of course, but they claim to draw, 3,500, 4,000 people a day, and they're busy in the morning and the afternoon. So they think they're a great draw, and I think to some degree they are. I think consumers have changed to some degree because everybody kind of wears workout clothes now. And I think in the old days, people didn't like to go into the gym in their workout clothes. So I think the customer is slightly different nowadays. But I think in the case of changing the use restrictions, the owner did get compensated to do that, and it was a case of, the devil you know is better than the devil you don't.
Say it's, I don't know, 20,000 foot building, retail bay, office bays. There's a Growlers moving into the building, but it's been predominantly office use. It's sort of in there. How do you spin trying to sell another bay to an office user when you got a Growlers beer store going into a sort of a office related building?
Good mixed use question.
Well, as a marketing person, that's not so daunting really, because they could have different hours of operation. You work 8 to 5 in an office, and maybe you get lunch business at Growlers, but the bulk of it's probably happy hour and after. So it doesn't need to present a problem. If anything, it's a quick way to get your lunch. Just walk outside and get a quick bite and come back to work.
I didn't know there was that much food. I thought they were just beer. The guy was kind of concerned about.
They do have food.
Oh.
I mean, I have a Growlers in one of my centers, and it's been a great draw.
That makes
So
more
it's
sense.
like the new anchor because it drives customers to the center. So it depends on the particulars of your shopping center maybe the proximity, but just on the face value, I don't see that as a major hurdle.
I didn't know they had food, that makes more sense.
Well, they're in one of my buildings, so.
Charlie, if you would just quit drinking and order something, you know that kind of stuff.
Is it your food?
In some of the larger metros around the country, pop-up retail has become a larger idea. Do you feel like there's any opportunity in Tucson for that type of retail, from anywhere from a startup that needs just 3 months to get it rolling to a large national brand like Coach opening up a storefront for 3 months, signing a short-term lease, just so that they can get the sales for that 3 months without owning or signing any long-term leases? Is there any movement in Tucson along those lines?
Yeah, we would definitely be very interested in any pop-up store if we have availability. We did one at the corner of Campbell and River, a retail boutique. Go buy all your Christmas clothes there. So.
In the next 5 years, what areas of Tucson are you guys most bullish and/or bearish on?
I think the Sunshine Mile area, which is going to be redeveloped on Broadway from Country Club down to downtown, is going to be pretty interesting. Rio Nuevo is going to try to run it. The city is taking the property on both sides for the widening of Broadway, but it's going to open up for the first time, getting rid of some of those buildings that Sarah talked about that are physically obsolete, and hopefully be able to convert that into something that is more vibrant in that section of town.
And I think with the road widening, everybody that remembers what happened with Speedway from Euclid to Alvernon, I mean, it's a pretty nice street now, and it was horrendous before. So I think George is absolutely right. Broadway is a better demographic street, and so it'll be a hell of a corridor then.
How do you retailers like your intersections that have Michigan lefts now?
Charlie, I think it just changes what the definition of the corner is. If you look at what happened at Ina and Oracle, we had Starbucks on the traditional hard corner, and then the intersection was redeveloped, Whole Foods expanded. So they moved to the new corner, which is actually a few hundred yards to the west, where people come through and do that U-turn to come around. So you still end up with a convenient access in, and then a right turn out, and you still come out. So from a functional standpoint, it's still the corner, even though it's not visibly the classical corner that we see. It just changes that dynamic a little bit, and it actually minimizes the value of the actual corner to some extent.
Right. I think with that case that Rob's talking about, that store really did suffer in sales, and that Starbucks was usually number 1, 2, or 3 in the city, and those were sales dollars they did not want to lose. And that site they took was, it's a strange site, and it's got the worst drive-through in the world, and blah blah blah, but it works. And the sales dipped a little bit, but they're thrilled that they made that deal, and that was a deal we couldn't see room to fit.
For instance, at the southeast corner of Grant and Oracle, Circle K, which had a small store there recently, through the owner, because they had a land lease on that site, they purchased an adjacent site and built a larger store there. And even at First Avenue, years ago, the drugstore chain built one knowing that the indirect left turn was going there. So there are those major corner users that are developing at the indirect left turns, and there really hasn't been any downturn in the ability to develop on those corners, and so we haven't seen any negative impact at all.
I have a question, Ray. Why is it that those closed Walgreens along Grant Road, they don't seem to be impaired by that turn, but I don't know why they suddenly went vacant?
I think the rumor in the retail business is the theft problem was horrendous at Oracle and Grant and Alvernon with Walgreens, and that's why they closed the stores. I don't know what other people have heard. Have you heard something, Rob?
Yeah, as well as the Fry's closing at that same Grand Alvernon was principally due to theft. They were having people take entire shopping carts out, and of course they're not allowed to stop them, and so they just couldn't keep the doors open anymore due to the theft level in that area. On the Michigan left subject as well, if you don't mind my saying, there's always going to be a really close dynamic between transportation planning and land use planning and retail. And I think that if you take a corridor like Grant and you consistently put Michigan lefts all the way down the street, that if you want to be on Grant, you're just going to have to figure out how it works. And everybody's at the same disadvantage. As long as everybody's on the same level field, they will figure out ways to make it work. It's when you have discontinuous sort of situations and partially or disconnected land use planning concepts that you end up with real problems.
Is retail still driven by traffic counts, or is there more dynamic going on with population demographics, aging of population, median income levels? Is that becoming more important?
In my experience, each retailer kind of has their own formula. They throw it all into the mix and see where each location comes out and then choose.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of cars going by Speedway and Grant in some parts, and there's no action there. I don't think it's the traffic counts. I think it's maybe a propensity to shop on the south side of town, Valencia going out there. A demographic there might shop more at stores than would be at other locations. So I'm not sure how traffic counts. I don't put it in my head as I'm looking at a property that has got 45,000 cars or 25,000 cars. It's more the surrounding area and what the competition is.
You know, there's a lot of layered data that goes into who is going to shop at any specific retailer. One thing I would say, though, when you're talking about traffic counts, you're talking about physical presence, and if 45,000 pairs of eyes see you every single day, then you have point-of-mind awareness. There's an article that came out, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how that interplays. I think you're alluding to online sales being somewhat competitive, and of course you have to have that online presence as well, as Barnes & Noble found out and Borders did not. So there was an article in the January 30th Forbes, and Forbes is a mainline business magazine. We're not talking about a shopping center magazine or a real estate magazine. And the CEO of Euclid Retail Analytics did a study showing what happens with, and Sarah mentioned it from a different direction during the presentation as well. If you have stores, we silo up into our bricks and mortar versus our online stores. And so the online guys are having a great time because their sales are going up within the same company. Let's say it's a shoe store. Their online sales for the shoe store is going up. Their bricks and mortar are coming down. These guys are crying because we, until now, haven't realized the synergy between the two things. That physical presence that you're asking about with the traffic counts is vitally important to the online sales. And what this article stated was that, let's say there's 4 or 5 shoe stores around a mall. If one of them closes that physical store, within that same geographic area, that's important, that same geographic area, their online sales diminish. So our measure, our classical measure of same-store sales in retail is going to have to change because that store, yeah, is declining, but the online sales within that same market area for that store are actually rising. So there's a synergy there, and I don't think we can ever get away from having good high visibility locations.
The slide with showing retail versus per capita build out for the United States was a helpful slide. Do you have data to support how overbuilt Tucson is? And if so, can you codify it by specific markets, north, south, east, west?
I didn't break it out in terms of submarkets. I do have a chart in this study that compares us to some of the other cities that I mentioned in here, Phoenix, Albuquerque, Vegas, and surprisingly, a lot of those have, and that's estimates that I did based upon comparing population to what CoStar said the retail space was, and actually, a lot of those cities have more retail space per capita than we do. So when you look at those surrounding cities, we are not at the top. There are quite a few of those that have more than us.
And remember, there's this blurring of the uses on street side retail becoming oftentimes offices, so it does mess it up. However, one of the things I had made my note is we have always been overbuilt, and I do believe that supply and demand is going to put some pressure on the rents, and that's why Sarah said rents are in the $10 range for second and third quality, B and C quality retail. There is that supply and demand is coming and is not going to go away. We might find alternative uses for retail buildings.
Given that retailers' sales are sometimes being pulled into the online sales, are you approaching your deal making different with retailers and sort of abandoning the whole idea of asking for the percentage rent clauses? I know my clients on the whole, I just suggest take that off the table. What do you think?
We typically only ask for percentage rent for certain types of uses, specifically restaurants. So, you know, that's kind of where we are. We know the conversation of online sales and percentage rent we don't have those two together. So.
I agree, and on some properties recently we've been doing a modified gross rent, so you don't even get into the argument over CAM charges, which is another flash button for retailers. Just give them a number and ask for it to go up maybe 3% a year. So yeah, we're not doing much with percentage rents either.
How depressed is the pricing for retail along Grant Road where the widening still needs to take place? There's a lot of old buildings that absolutely need to be demolished. So therefore you need to build a new building, but you're not necessarily going to land that tenant until after the road is widened. So if somebody wants to sell today, what kind of a discount are they taking as opposed to some other, you know, major thoroughfare?
Right around the corner here is the old, it was Connolly Billiards, then after that it was the Cool Church, and now it's an automotive use. That sold to the Cool Church for about $725,000, about $72 a foot. It converted over to the church thing use, which would have been a consistent value expectation, and it wound up selling after about 2.5 years for $525,000. And the specific reason given by 70% of the people that I showed it to over the course of 2 years, long project, was, what's the widening going to do to me? And I have no one to refer to. The city won't tell you. So anybody buying it is kind of rolling the dice. And frankly, I don't know if any city officials here, but I kind of resent that, because it puts a black cloud over the entire alignment because nobody knows what the future looks like. And that has the effect of lowering values. And when the city comes along to do the condemnation in order to make that widening happen, they pay less money for it. To me, it's kind of a form of blockbusting, and I think it's wrong.
It's almost the same situation that happened on the Sunshine Mile corridor. I mean, that project sat in limbo for 20 or 30 years or something. And here we are.
Yeah, it's had a negative impact on a lot of property owners. You feel bad for these guys that own properties that are depending on, you know, to make a living and can't rent them because of the cloud. And that's absolutely the case. That was an excellent response, Rob. Let's just go quickly, starting with George. For 2019, do you think rents will be up, down, and vacancy will be up or down or flat?
You got to give me the property. If it's a new property, we signed a lease at $40 a foot for a 4,000-foot restaurant. Big numbers. If it's second generation space, I got all you need. Come see Andy at $7 a square foot.
Thank you. Toby?
I think it's going to all stay about the same, I think, for those exact reasons.
Debbie?
Yeah, I think they're going to stay the same.
Same? Rob?
I think they'll stay the same once we're above, while we're still above 3% vacancy. I think of 3% as the threshold that begins where we'll see significant rate increases. Although I'd like to echo again what George has said. You are either in the right spot or you just are not. And you can be at Smashburger, who's paying, I think, what, $26 a foot there at Broadway and Craycroft, and you can with a 7-iron get properties that you can get for $7 a foot. So if you're in the right place, those rents will go up. If you're in the wrong place, they're going to stay the same.
Okay, anybody have any last comments, any good jokes you want to tell, anything else?
Thank you,
before we
panel.
call it? Thank you.